Robert, Seri, thank you so much for coming this evening. We appreciate your time. As I said to the audience, and as I said before, the big question that is on everyone's mind is what is going to happen in September 2011, where that puts Israel in terms of its immediate future, and especially, and this is for the younger audience here, what can we as citizens of Israel help secure a better future for this country?
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, also for inviting me here in this very nice setting. And I'm actually pleased to talk with you on this topic. You hear me now? Yes. All right, I keep it a bit closer to my mouth, so to say. So once again, I'm very much also appreciating myself to be able to talk with you about what may or may not happen in September. September, which is clearly then again connected with the United Nations. And I wish, by the way, that it will be a positive event. I know that in being the representative here also for the Secretary General in Israel, that very often the United Nations, probably also with this audience, that mainly you have some negative connotations with the United Nations. One of the first Hebrew words which I learned are shmum. At the same time, I wish to remind you that you owe your birthright to the United Nations. Your own constitution mentions the United Nations 5 times. I'm of course referring to what happened in 1948. I'm myself a Dutch diplomat. I have been serving also, for instance, in the Soviet Union in the 80s, when actually my country was representing Israel's interests. So I was very much involved also in the emigration at the time from the Soviet Union. And I can tell you that at that time, one thing I learned was how important, not only for Israeli citizens here, but for Jews wherever they live, it is how important it is actually for you to have your homeland, which was established in 1948. Now I'm here in my capacity as serving Ban Ki-moon as his senior diplomatic representative in the region. Let me first tell you what that means for me. It's a fascinating job because every day I cross the lines. I have my headquarters in Jerusalem. This morning, for instance, I've been here at the Kiryat to talk with officials of the Ministry of Defense. The same day I can go to Ramallah and talk with Salam Fayyad or other authorities of the Palestinian representatives of the Palestinian Authority. No, I just give you a little bit of background what the job means. For instance, this evening I'm also taking a flight to New York because I'm also from time to time briefing the Security Council myself. Every month my office is also presenting reports about the situation here in the region to the Security Council. Now, you have asked me to in particular talk about what could happen in September. But before we get there, I think we need to talk a bit then first about how we have been getting where we are now. And let me start actually with when I started this job. I've been here now for more than 3 years with you, and I started my job actually when the Annapolis conference took place, and when many would say belatedly the former US President Bush decided that he had to take an initiative to get the parties back to the table and negotiate a two-state solution. That was the time also, I think, when the international community really united on this concept of a two-state solution, which we as the international community believe is the only reasonable way to find a compromise between you and the Palestinians. That's also very much my remit. Of course, I have Security Council resolutions which are relevant for me, and that's what we all hoped would start 3 years ago with the so-called Annapolis process, Now, this Annapolis process, first of all, it hasn't brought us very far. You know that, of course. But still, it's important to look at how it was set up, because it's still relevant for where we are now. What was agreed at the time was that there would be a top-down and bottom-up approach, which actually should reinforce each other. With top-down, of course, I mean that negotiations, that the parties agreed to start negotiations on a framework agreement to arrive at a two-state solution, which would then also resolve all the so-called core issues. And you know what the core issues are. It's the question of borders, of security, what will happen with the settlements, Jerusalem, and refugees. That was the top-down approach. But there was also an important agreement at the time that at the same time, as the objective would be a two-state solution, that we needed to build the foundations, the institutions of a two-state solution. That, of course, is what I mean with the bottom-up approach. Now, there's one other aspect when we started 3 years ago, which certainly is complicating matters also now. I still remember that when I started this job, that of course we had not a situation of unity on the Palestinian side. I started my job with division between the West Bank and Gaza, which in particular for the United Nations is a very difficult situation because we have large operations in Gaza. Think about UNRWA in particular, also because of the population in Gaza. More than half have the status of refugees. So this was another, from the beginning, very complicating factor in what was started at the time. That in fact also we were talking with the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, but not with Hamas, which until today is not accepting the so-called three principles of the quartet. That is how I started my job. Well, we had 1 year of Annapolis. We saw some progress, by the way, on the political side. You remember all what was discussed between Olmert and Abbas, but it came to nothing. It was not enough time, as actually all experts feared that for the American president to start such an initiative in the last year of his presidency. Well, it was a long shot to believe that everything would be agreed within 1 year. It didn't happen. But even worse, at the end of that year, we had the Gaza war. Now, I'm not going to discuss here with you whether that war was necessary in terms of the many rockets which were coming out of Gaza. I know that many here thought that for security reasons you had very little choice but to do what you have been doing. But of course, it meant a major reversal of what we had been trying to do. It meant a reversal, in particular also in terms of what seems to be bubbling up a little bit between you and Syria. You know what happened also later with Turkey after the flotilla incident. It was a major reversal in terms also of your relations with the region, I'm afraid, what happened during and after the Gaza war. But we got a new government in Israel and we got a new administration in the US. That new administration in the US in the first days appointed Senator Mitchell, who resigned a few days ago, as you all must have noticed. What happened? There were a lot of expectations that this process of Annapolis, in one way or the other, would be picked up again and would continue. But what we have seen, that while the bottom-up approach continued, that in particular the negotiation side, the need to find compromises for all the difficult political issues, that actually what we have seen there, I could actually, I think, summarize it in having had the longest talks about talks. You remember how long it took, also after finally a settlement freeze was agreed, that only after 9 months, last year in September, parties went to Washington and finally began to negotiate. But after that, we have seen the shortest negotiations ever. because I think they have been negotiating for 3 or 4 weeks. Then the settlement freeze expired. And I must tell you that the expectation, not only of the Palestinians, but of the international community, the United States included, it was an expectation, not a certainty, but we certainly had hoped that the government of Israel would have extended that freeze. It didn't happen. And since then, in fact, the peace process, I mean with that, the top-down approach went into a deep freeze again. In the meantime, and I think this is very important for you to understand, because you're not like me. I told you that every day I am in the West Bank. I go to Ramallah. I go to Nablus, Hebron. A little miracle took place there. These institutions of the state were built up by very much due to the leadership of President Abbas, but maybe even more so by his very capable Prime Minister Fayyad. Security cooperation between you and this Palestinian Authority has never been, I think, better than before. In a way, I sometimes have the feeling that this has been already your first experiment with what could be your neighbor, a Palestinian state in the waiting. And actually, if I look back at the very concerning events of yesterday, the Nakba, and all the demonstrations which took place, you had more trouble on the northern border and with Syria than actually in the West Bank, where Palestinian security forces have been closely coordinating with the IDF, with Israeli security counterparts, to avoid major disturbances. I would also like to remind you that in the past 3 years that I've been here, it could always be better, but it has also been relatively quiet for Israel. Again, that's a dividend from building up this state next to you, the institutions which have been built up there. I know you can't travel there, but believe me, the situation has changed in places like Ramallah, Nablus, and also Hebron, a conservative bastion with supposed to be a place where Hamas is very strong. I can tell you it is looking normal there now, much more than it has ever been there in recent times. Now I'm saying all this because this brings us now to September. Can we sustain this? We feel, as the United Nations, I have been attending an important conference in Brussels a couple of weeks ago, where the international community, in particular the donor community, has also been assessing what is happening on the ground. We feel that this Palestinian state building has now passed a Rubicon, so to say. They are capable to set up such a state. That is the expert opinion not only of the United Nations but also of the IMF and the World Bank. However, what I also had to conclude in our report to this meeting in Brussels is that at the same time, of course, there is a growing disconnect with what happens on the political side. This project has reached both its political and physical limits now.